Mayday! Today is May 1st, 2018. And right now, I just looked outside, and even though it's 9 o'clock at night, the sky is still slightly glowing. And, we call it twilight, but that name has sort of unfortunately become associated with a rather bad bunch of books. And so we're not always comfortable talking about Twilight because the problem is they're not universally despised. They should be. Some people, many young women, have found them extremely influential and many in cases of them being very influential in their formative years. Woe to the rest of us who are men who have to grow up or get old with women that believe that Edward is the ideal husband material. And let me be perfectly frank, I don't really care that the vampires sparkle in sunlight. That's never been my primary concern with Twilight. My primary concern with Twilight is how it's about a woman who pines after an emotionally abusive boyfriend that turns her into a vampire for reasons, and then leaves her for reasons, and then she falls for a werewolf instead, but can't really, cinch things up with the werewolf, so she has a baby that magically grows up to be a teenager really quickly, so the baby can date the werewolf. It's some of the worst writing I've ever heard of. 50 Shades of Grey sounds like an improvement in most cases, although it obviously has its own issues. So, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about Eventide. Eventide is a very old name for Twilight. The idea being that high tide and low tide were usually in the middle of the day, so the beginning and end of daylight marked the even point of the tide, where it wasn't quite high and it wasn't quite low. That's my understanding of it, at least. But it's such a wonderful word. Dusk, dawn, eventide. These are fantastic words that I can't get enough of. I love to use that sort of name, something dusk or dawn or eventide related. And I like being out in it when it's not quite dark yet, especially if it's warm. If you can go out and it's warm at night in the middle of summer when that dusk is so late in the day, sometimes 9 o'clock is when the sun sets, and you'll have a period of dusk right up till 10. But that's usually right at the height of summer, right at the solstice on June 22nd, which is still a month and 2/3 of a month away. So we've still got another long way before the days start getting shorter. I always loved summer vacation, specifically because I could stay up late. When I was a kid, I didn't see the value. Well, rather, my parents were trying to get me to go to bed at a reasonable time, even though it was the middle of summer and I could, sleep in. But they sort of preferred to have a bit of nighttime without the kids running around the house. So I can understand why they would have me try to get to bed early. I remember being in junior high and staying up well past 9 o'clock, which 9 o'clock until I was about 12 was, roughly my bedtime. Between 8 and 9 o'clock is when I was supposed to go to bed. And the first time I stayed up till 9, I don't think my parents knew about it, but, they didn't pay attention and didn't really care. And so I just kept doing that for a while. And I remember the first time I stayed up till 10, playing a game or watching TV or something, and my mom stumbled onto me, and I must have been 13 or 14 at least by that point. And I remember her being sort of non-interested. Like, I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mom, I'll go to bed." And she was like, "Okay, it's fine." I know that I had been working pretty hard on my homework that day, so maybe she was showing a little lenience, or maybe she really just didn't care. Homework is the thing I miss the least about being at school. Going to school, actually being at school was actually pretty fun, but trying to focus on homework once I was done with school, I like to have my 8-hour day in the middle of the day, do the work, come home and relax. If I have a couple chores to do, if I have a couple errands I need to run, that's fine. But finishing work and then coming home and trying to keep working for 3 hours when it is in fact work and not some sort of fun project I'm doing for myself, like my writing, that, no, I'm not a fan. I've often thought about going back and trying to get another degree, something more business oriented. I just don't think I could do it. I don't know, maybe I could, but it's not in the cards right now. Oh, but this final light of the day, things I would do in the summer. We would stay out as long as there was any light, and sometimes a little bit after in Minnesota during the summer, because that was when it was the most comfortable, being outside late in the day, as long as the insects weren't going completely bonkers, which they usually did. May marked the start of insect breeding season. April was usually fine because it was still too cold for the bugs to come out. But right around Memorial Day, things got really nasty as far as the insect kingdom was concerned. But even so, I remember playing flashlight tag at another guy's house. A guy named Brian. I don't remember his last name anymore. But we did a few sleepovers. The first tent sleepover I ever remember doing was with him. And Brian got me to do some stupid stuff. He was not a bad kid, but he was sort of adventurous, more adventurous than I was sometimes. He and another kid and I were at a horse ranch. Well, at least they had one horse in a fenced-off area. And they told me it was an electric fence and dared me to grab hold of this fence. Because one of them touched it and then was like, but nothing weird happened. I found out that he was faking, because this was not an electrical fence of the kind where it's always electrified. And he thought it was off. He was just trying to trick me. So I grabbed it with both hands and didn't notice anything at first. And then a second later, I felt somebody kick me in the back of my butt. But it wasn't the kid. It wasn't some prank he was trying to pull. The electricity in the fence came out in a pulse every second or so. And so I gripped it, and then the pulse jolted through me and basically tensed up every muscle in my body. I must have been 10 or 11 years old at the time. And I felt like it kicked me 3 feet straight up into the air, and I thankfully let go so I didn't get hit by another pulse. But I fell back on the ground and just wondered what had happened, while the other two guys, bewildered, started laughing. But they helped me up. I was used to kids being a lot meaner than that. A couple of kids in my own neighborhood were a bit meaner than that. But Brian, that was how I knew Brian wasn't a bad guy. He was adventurous, and he liked to try stuff that would have been maybe unpopular with my parents. But he was not out to get me, and I really respected him for that. If you're out there, man, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember that incident in particular. And that was right at the end of the day. That was such a nice day. Well, I'm Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.